So welcome to this very special segment at this very important meeting organized by our partners in Saudi Arabia under the presidency of the kingdom. We are at a very important period uh, as far as the global community is concerned, and we need some key institutions and organizations to respond to the immediate crisis of the pandemic, but the longer tail of responding to the economic slowdown, of building lives and livelihoods in the years ahead. We are joined today by one of India's most remarkable thinkers and political leaders, Shri Suresh Prabhu, who is India's G20 Sherpa, and much more. He is someone who has transformed Indian electricity sector. He has worked closely in India's rural transformations. He has led India's commerce and trade initiatives. He has re-energized the railways and the aviation sector. And today he will be architecting the Indian approach as it moved towards its own presidency in the year 2022, which also happens to be India's 75th year celebration since independence. Mr. Prabhu, thank you so much for joining us and welcome to this conversation. Mr. Prabhu, you are very familiar with the process. You are very familiar with Saudi Arabia. You have made multiple visits there, even during the pandemic. Let me ask you a very simple, direct question. Is G20 a body competent to respond to the crisis today? And are we doing enough at the G20 to respond to both the immediate challenge and the longer term impact on our economies and on our lives and livelihoods?
If we really look at it, the very fact that pandemic has affected more than 200 countries or territories, because some may not be sovereign countries, but still territories, but they have affected more than 200 of those. And that shows that this is not just a simple local problem. It has a huge reach, and therefore it needs, if it is started from a local area, but has now reached global proportion, so obviously needs global response. The problem is global, the response has to be global. Now, which is that institution which can actually offer that response? Now, it's not just a mere healthcare crisis, though it started like that. But now it has become economic crisis. It has become a social problem. It has become a challenge for science. It has become a problem for policymakers. So it has become a very multidimensional problem. Now, which is that institution in the world, which has the ability, which is that platform in the world, which can deal with such complex issues? And therefore, there is no other institution that is even not in G20 is not an institution, but there is no other platform of the kind that G20 is to deal with such multidimensional, multifaceted problem that we are facing today. And therefore, G20 is far more relevant today than any other time in the past. We realized it way back when we had a financial crisis, that G20 must respond to it. And therefore, 2008 was a very remarkable year in which G20 addressed it in a very significant way. And some of the institutional steps that were taken have resulted in creating some response mechanism as well to deal with a contingency when it arises of that kind. But today, it is absolutely unprecedented, unparalleled, and I hope will not repeat again. But a kind of crisis that we are facing today has to be dealt with by first influential players in the world. And G20 has got 20 countries, but of course, the countries who actually the platform provides also visibility to not just 20, but far more. So the head of many multilateral agencies participate, the heads of some of the regional groupings to participate. The African Union president comes in. So many players who participate in it besides the G20 countries, which are G20 economies, top 20 economies, which together constitute 86% of the global GDP. Mm-hmm. So you can imagine that if we want to deal with a massive problem of this scale, you also need people who have the ability to deal with it. They who have the convening power, the influence on global affairs. And I don't think there is anybody else, any other institution, another platform than G20 currently can deal with it. At the same time, there is also another dimension, which you really look at it, unfortunately, I repeat, unfortunately, because all the so-called multilateral institutions, which were created to deal with a specific problem, whether related to security, related to health, related to social issues, related to culture, related to economy, they're all becoming ineffective. They're all becoming non-participatory in some way. And therefore, there is a need for a stronger body like this at a time, again, I repeat, that this is absolutely, no one could imagine something like this could ever happen, and I hope not again. So therefore, I think G20 is a very important thing, and Saudi Arabia, to put on record, has played a very key role, because this is the first G20 year, presidency year, in which there is such a pandemic. So they are facing something, world is facing, but they are also facing it, but they handle it extremely well. Even today, I have a meeting with the G20 Sherpa, which is we are going on for 3 days. Next 3 days, we'll have meetings, 3-day long meetings, and which will again have another 3-day long meetings just before the Leaders Summit on the little later in the month. So I think we really are looking forward to G20 playing a more effective role.
Sir, you mentioned a very important point, the ineffectiveness of traditional multilateral institutions and approaches. Let me add one more complication. We are also seeing an increase in political conflicts and contests. We are also seeing a degree of economic nationalism, a retreat from globalization in many parts of the world. In this political climate, can the G20 deliver, and how can we overcome it as a grouping so that we can focus on economics even as we continue to have differences in the political domain?
You're absolutely right. There is a real emergence of new spirit in the world, which does not necessarily capture the essence of the solution that we really need to seek together. And therefore, people are turning inwards. People are trying to think that they can solve, they forget solving, but they don't want to deal with global problems, so they would like to be confined to their own borders, forgetting the fact that whether we like it or not, we have come a long way, and therefore we have to deal with some of the complex problems together. Let us look at vaccine. Everybody says that vaccine is a problem to corona. Absolutely true. May not be the 100% solution, but still a problem. It's still a solution. But if it is a solution, then vaccine development must happen collaboratively. It must happen not just in the laboratories collaboratively, but even delivery of it, even the testing of it, even the kind of volunteers who are coming forward to offer themselves as like a live laboratories to test whether this is going to work on the human bodies or not. All of this needs global effort. And therefore, in situation like this, you cannot address a problem of this kind. Let us take another example of another problem, climate change. You think, can you deal climate change on your own? Like healthcare, you cannot deal on your own. Climate change also cannot be dealt on their own. And the problem cannot be dealt on their own, but also solutions cannot be found unless we work together. And we realized, and we are a beneficiary, the world is a beneficiary of it. We have the solution of it, so we don't act on it is a different thing. United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change created a body for the scientists. And that body has really come out with solutions to the problem. They know exactly, the science has proved what a climate change is. So why did it happen? The scientists of all the world came together. If there was no scientific community coming together like this, at least firstly, the acceptability of that science would not have been as good as it is today. And moreover, that particular science would not have been able to come out with such ideas unless they had come together. So coming together is the most important aspect of solving today's global problem. And no problem is local anymore. Even if you look at this, but take example of this. It started in China and it has now engulfed the whole world. Now the second wave which is coming is affecting Europe so badly. So can any continent, any country, any geography can say we are immune to this? It's no longer true. And same thing with climate change. Like for example, US is suffering one of the worst forest fires this year on the West Coast. Also facing at the same time some of the worst typhoons. They always this is a season for those, but this season, this particular year was the worst year in terms of receiving so many of these natural calamities in one single year. They don't start in US. They start somewhere maybe in Africa, in the oceans of Africa. But they travel long distance to hit the US coast. So ultimately, the problems are really speaking, you cannot stop the problem. When the tsunami hit the India and so many Asian countries, where did tsunami start? It didn't start in India. It didn't start in Sri Lanka. It didn't start in Indonesia. It started somewhere else. So it starts somewhere else, but hits the other countries. So obviously, you cannot now come and say that I have nothing to do with this. I will solve my own problem. It is not possible anymore for any country to think like this. At least on some issues, global action, global cooperation, global collaboration is absolutely essential.
And are you sensing that in your G20 interactions that your group is actually working beyond politics and trying to find a common framework approach for some of these global issues that you listed, which I will come back to a little later? But are you sensing the mood in your own community who's tirelessly working through the pandemic to find these collective action frameworks?
See, let us accept the reality that 20 countries come from 20 different backgrounds. The different nationalities, obviously, they will try to bring that baggage of their own priorities on the table. Absolutely no doubt about it. Therefore, we all respect that there is a difference which we have to accept and also respect both. Now, having done that, there are certain issues on which we really rise above all this. For example, take response to Corona itself. In fact, there was a virtual leaders meet, and which resulted in a lot of action on Corona itself. So that has really demonstrated that we can act together. That's another example, which is not today's but a few years ago. The G20 decided to work on some critical parameters on which financial system of the world should really function. And there was a board which was created to deal with it. That has also functioned well. Then look at some of the issues on which, for example, anti-corruption issues, which our Prime Minister Narendra Modi has been leading light on taking it forward. On that issue again, there has been a lot of global action. Terrorism is another such issue, though the action should be more. But issues like that, today countries are realizing that we must address it together. We may have differences with each other, which they are, but we must address it together. But again, to having said all this, there are certain issues on which there should be more collaboration, which G20 must do it. For example, on climate change. This was the first time in Osaka we had on climate change, there is a 19+1 formulation, which I don't think should be the case. All 20 should join hands to work on that. But that's the case. So I agree with you that politics will always not allow the full potential of global cooperation to be realized. At the same time, without global cooperation, domestic politics also will not give benefit to the domestic constituency to the extent to which they really need to benefit from global cooperation. For example, a vaccine is a good example.
No, I want to share with all of us who are participating today another facet of Mr. Prabhu. He is one of the earliest and loudest voices on climate action. In fact, he had led and steered global parliamentarian groups. He had, in fact, helped create a whole new think tank in India that was focusing on these critical questions. And of course, he has been someone who's always championed for climate action. So my next question is actually based on this facet of yours. As we move to 2022, which is now 14 months away, the Saudi presidency is concluding, the Italian presidency gets underway, and thereafter India starts steering the process. We also have the G7 in the middle. We also have COP26 sometimes in November next year in Glasgow. Do you think it is time for countries like India, Italy, and others to actually put into place a green stimulus that everyone signs on to? Is it time to build back green, build back using technology, build back with SDG agenda as the principal ethic for everyone to embrace? And do you think that moment is right for that?
I don't think we have really choice anymore, because we are really running out of time as far as action is concerned. And we are running out of resources as a global community, because we are using much more than what is available on this planet. So we really have no choice but to go green, but go fast, because the green light, but then you can cross the signal anywhere in the world. But I think there is now only one sign that you can see, the red sign. So the green is necessary. Otherwise, the red sign is already, nature is already flashing that red sign for a long, long time. So if we are not heading to it, I think we are heading for a real disaster. In fact, if you really look at it, I was just very interestingly, the country which does not necessarily always, there are many voices in the country which support it, but not unequivocally, there's the endorsement of that. Even in the US presidency election, climate change has become a very important issue, which is very heartening to see. And one of the most uh, state which is going to determine the result of the presidency election, one of the few states, the battleground states, is so that state, in fact, is facing a lot of problems because of climate change. And that is something which is going to create issues for the community, which the community are saying in the election time that we are losing tourism, we are losing our agriculture, we are losing our businesses because of climate change. So this is a realization which has come into the people's mind. So this is something which, therefore, I think this is no longer a choice to see whether we'll go green or we'll not go green. And therefore, I welcome that even presidency election in the United States is now what the important issue on which they're fighting. There have always been some issues. Immigration has been the issue. Issues like that always been the US election issue dominant. But this time, even climate change has become a major issue because people are also realizing it.
No, I guess you are referring to 2 or 3 important states in the US which derive their revenues from energy traditionally, but are today actually battling the impact of climate change. And by the way, even Texas is a very important state which is right on the verge of maybe turning to a different political direction. So let's see. That is for November 3rd, not for the G20. But let me ask you 2 important questions, sir. One is for you. What are the lessons that we have learned from the past, from the Saudi Arabian presidency, from the Japanese, Argentinian, and others who have contributed to the process? What is it that we have learned that countries like Italy and India should embrace in terms of the role and the structure of the G20? And how do we make it more popular amongst the common people? G20 is still seen to be the very wise and intellectual and powerful people's club. How do we make it a more mass organization where young teenagers can send you letters that we are interested in this issue and why don't you take it up? How do we make it more popular amongst the street?
So 2 aspects to what you're asking. Firstly, we would like to carry forward the good work done by the previous presidencies. That is for sure. Each presidency has put on table some of the very important issues. Like, for example, this time Saudi Arabia talked about land degradation. Japanese talked about the problems of the old, as well as the technology which can address them. So each presidency brings on table a lot of interesting issues. And Saudi Arabia, despite all the challenges, have really been able to focus on the issues very effectively. So we like to carry forward those issues for sure. We're not just going to dump them when India takes over the presidency, but we like to try to work on them because we feel it's a work in progress, because in 1 year you cannot address all such global issues in same time. So we have to continue with them. We'll do that. But at the same time, India would like to add some of the priorities. Particularly, we feel that the countries which are in the room, the 20 countries, have a responsibility to take care of those who are not in the room. So there are many more countries who are not actually sitting around the table of G20, but we have a responsibility to take care of them. So India would like to work on behalf of all the countries in the world, particularly the most vulnerable ones, vulnerable from economic perspective, vulnerable from social perspective, challenging situation for them from climate perspective, all of them. We like to work with them and try to take this forward. So this is for sure. As far as the specific issue that we like to take forward, exactly the what point that you made, we are trying to get it from people themselves. What do you think should be the issues that G20 should focus on when India is the presidency? Because India is a presidency, holding presidency on behalf of 1.4 billion people. So their voice also has to be reflected and their concerns have to be articulated when we actually take up this presidency. So we are working on that. We are trying to bring together all kind of stakeholders from different facets, from different spheres, from different backgrounds. And we already started working on that from academics, from scientific community, from social organizations, universities, many of those. And we'll try to therefore form some sort of alliance of all these different institutions, which will feed us into some of these issues and try to give us some advice and guidance, and we like to take it forward. But this is very important. Another part that you just mentioned, and very important aspect, though you mentioned it as a passing, it's a very important issue. See, the G20 is one of the problem of G20 is that it doesn't have a permanent secretariat, which is an advantage, and also because advantage is it provides flexibility. But sometimes the institutional memory, which is necessary, is not necessarily stored into the G20s. Today, OECD is doing a very good job. In fact, my very dear friend, the former senior minister from Mexico, who is now the Director General, in fact, I just spoke to him the other day, and they do a wonderful job, no doubt about it. But still, G20 will have to now, over a period of time, think about how do you make sure that if this institution, this platform has come as one of the important players in the world affairs, then how can we institutionalize that arrangement? Something we'll have to very seriously think over a period of time.
So final question, since we are hosting you under the T20 process, the Think Tank 20 process, under the Saudi presidency with our partners. My question to you would be, as a G20 Sherpa, how important are organizations that feed into the larger ecosystem, like the W20, the Business 20, the Think Tank 20? How important are these efforts and initiatives for Sherpas and for the policymakers? Are we pleasing ourselves, or are we helping you out in any way?
No, they are extremely important. In fact, their views are very much respected. Their inputs are taken very seriously. In fact, most of the G20 leaders meeting, some of these organizations get an opportunity to come and make a personal presentation. The B20 made a very good presentation even in the last Japanese presidency. So many of them do that. And in fact, on the sidelines of G20 leaders meetings, we always have some of these organizations coming and making the presentation, which are taken into the FIDER's leaders meeting also very seriously. In fact, when we have the Sherpa meetings, we also get this feedback from each of these grouping. And when we are trying to prepare, this is what exactly we are in the process of preparing the final leaders statement, we are actually taking those ideas emanating from there as our input and as our strong guiding principles. So I think this is very, very important process. We take them very seriously. And I think without them, I think this will be like we are working in isolation. So we have to be connected with all these important social organizations, social groupings, society at large. And without them, I don't think G20 can ever see that we have the mandate of working on their behalf unless we take their views on board.
So I think that's a very good note to conclude this very in-depth yet small conversation, because we could have asked you so much more. It's a brief conversation because of the format, and we hope we'll be able to talk to you more often in the coming months as we move towards the Indian presidency. But your message is quite clear. G20 has an opportunity to serve humankind as a whole. It is at the forefront of responding to the challenges of our time. We need to think about building capabilities within the G20. We need to think about going green. We need to think about addressing the challenges faced by those who are not on the table. And of course, thank you so much for telling all of us that the work we do at the T20 makes a difference. And we hope what we produce at the outcome of the T20 process will be useful not only for the Saudi Arabian presidency, but will also feed into the Italian and Indian presidency. And so wish you all the best as you join the Troika this December and become part of the steering group for this very important platform that the world has built. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much.